Will Elon Musk change Twitter for the better or worse?
And why do Aussies feel like they're trapped into giving away their private data? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Hey there, welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading tech journalists to dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined, as always, by Alex Kidman, a man who was frustratingly outbid this week in his effort to snap up Twitter. Alex,
Dang it.
now that the deal has fallen through and, Elon pipped you at the post, where will you invest your billions? MySpace, Second Life?
I like this idea that you think I have billions somewhere. But leaving that aside, I actually thought it might be fun to try and revitalize ICQ. Remember ICQ?
Wow, now we're going back.
And then I looked it up and I realized there's a big problem with trying to revitalize ICQ. And I swear I am not making this up. The current owners of ICQ are a Russian internet firm. And I have this feeling that ASIO might want to have a few words to me if I started trying to broker a deal with them.
So, speaking of questionable financial investments, we're also joined once again this week by the AFR's technology editor, Paul Smith. Paul, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
What online service would you snap up if you had a few billion to spare?
Oh, I don't know. What do you reckon? I think, look, I don't reckon I can go head to head with Elon, although I reckon I've just as got much qualifications for running it as he does. I don't know.
So, opinions.
Facebook to close it down. How about that?
Yeah, I think you could actually go to market with that idea and get quite a lot of backing.
That'd be a public service for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's no bigger story this week than your friend and mine, Elon Musk, trying to take over Twitter. And Paul's here to discuss the impact that might have on the social network and why Elon wants to spend billions to make it happen. But Twitter, like many services, relies on a whole heap of our private data. And closer to home, a new report indicates that Australians feel like they're often trapped into a catch-22 where they need to hand over private data. Now, we all would rather stay safe online, so why do we let them talk us into handing over information we don't want them to have? Paul, what's the story here?
Well, yeah, basically, I did what I often don't do. I wrote a story based on a research report by cybersecurity companies, which is normally steeped in self-interest from said companies, which with the conclusion of if you invested more in cybersecurity, bad things wouldn't happen. But this was a study that was conducted by YouGov that does a lot of the election polling for a company whose name escapes me in the cybersecurity, Imperva. And it was looking at attitudes towards sharing data. And it was a global study, but with 1,000 Australians involved as well. And the headline finding that I found interesting was just the sheer number of people that have resigned to the fact that they've got to give away their data in order to make use of services that they want or feel like they need to use online. And it was high. I think it was in the 60%. I might be quoting myself wrong there of Australians thinking that, well, they know that they're putting themselves at some kind of risk by sharing their data, but they do it anyway. And the survey dug into some of the things that people feared would happen if their online behavior, particularly with sort of chat apps like WhatsApp or Signal, was revealed. And people were admitting that they've admitted to crimes, they've admitted to having affairs, they've talked about their colleagues, they've made racist jokes, they've said bad things about disabled people, all things, career-ending things, marriage-ending things, potential for losing their kids. But still, they do it on the principle that it hopefully won't happen to them. And it's just a sign that we're willing to give away so much for the convenience of online platforms. And I would probably put myself not in the criminal activity or anything like that. Well, not admitting to that on a podcast, but yeah, we all.
Oh, no one's listening. It's fine. Go ahead.
No, that's right. We all cross our fingers and hope, or lots of us do anyway, with these things. And there was a sense in some of the stats, and I won't bore you with going through the percentages and everything, but of people just feel like there's just so many sites that they log into and use their personal data that it's impossible to keep track of, and you get a pop-up notice saying your password has been compromised on other sites, and 25% of people just happily say they ignore that. So yeah, it's just a sign that, people use the services and hang the consequences. And living in a house with young kids who early in their phone use, I've seen exactly what kind of nonsense will be done if rules aren't in place, or if people don't have the maturity to know what they're doing.
So is this a situation? I mean, I found the percentages really interesting, especially when you compared like financial services that people seem to trust and social media services that they don't. But is this just a story of people being a bit daft online with what they're willing to say or willing to admit, or companies hoovering up all of that precious data and leaving us no real choice?
Well, I think one of the things that the company that commissioned the report was hoping would be more of the focus of the discussion around it was that essentially a lot of people don't trust organizations that they're doing the right thing with their data. And so a company would say, well, we'll help you with that. And so financial services companies were better trusted than, say, retailers. Very low levels of trust for retail operators. Health was second most trusted, but retailers, online messaging services, um, games, and that people just assume that whatever they are giving is being given away or being sold on, or not being done what they should be doing with it. And yet they almost feel, well, I want to use these services, so I'm going to do it anyway. And the point, the guy I was speaking to from the company itself was saying that organizations need to invest more, surprise in systems to sort of both protect data and show that it's being protected. But just the old thing, a lot more education needed about what you're using online, and how much of yourself you put out there, knowing that once it's out there, it's out there.
But Google's just turned around, and Apple did the same thing not so long ago and added these new privacy labels to apps in the App Store, which forced the developers to go into a lot more detail to say, this is the kind of data that we use, or information we take from your device. This is exactly who we share it with. This is how we protect it. So Apple and Google are forcing people who make apps to share that information, but it sounds like people aren't paying attention and don't really care in the end.
Well, I think it's the old thing of the terms and conditions that you've seen so many times that you just click through them, and you've got to look. I'm a technology editor at a newspaper, and the number of times I've quickly clicked through terms and conditions as well, because I want to use a service to, I don't know, transcribe an interview, and it's a news service. I thought I'll give it a go, and with a bit more common sense, I probably wouldn't have done it. But so I don't know. It's look. You mentioned Google. I've currently got the shits with them in terms of the way that they handle data. My daughter turned 13 last week, and on her 13th birthday, on the phone that's locked down with the sort of parental controls and all that, she's getting push notifications saying, "Hey, you don't need your parents' permission to do anything now. Click here to unlock all your accounts." And I just think, yeah, fuck off. I mean,
That's a bit rich at 13.
yeah, it feels to me like it feels predatory to me. And I'm sure it's the screen says, due to in Australia's laws, you don't have to get permission to do these things. So click here to proceed. And my daughter obviously showed me, and so I said, no, you're not proceeding with that. But I just think there's a sense of bare minimum. So we let you have all these services under control, but now as soon as you legally don't have to, we're going to do everything we can to get you to share your data. And that's just one example that's given me the shits this week. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I'm a bit sensitive to this idea of people putting too much of themselves up online, and and not thinking of the consequences. But I think most people do it. I mean, I don't know about you two. I mean, you're both very sensible types. Are you more discerning than I am with this kind of stuff?
I'd never admit to cheating on my wife on an app.
Well, okay, so I think to take a slight devil's advocate position on the 13-year-old Google thing, I can
Yeah.
think of situations, and I'm not saying that your family is in this situation, Paul, but I can think of situations where for some 13-year-olds, having that degree of control might be a good thing if they held viewpoints or were emerging as people that their parents might not approve of, for example. I think most people again
Mm.
will know what I'm getting at there. Um, then that might actually be a very powerful and valuable tool to them. But the other way to get around this, of course, Paul, when you set up your kids' accounts, is simply say, right, well, my 13-year-old daughter is actually 6. Google doesn't know.
That's yeah.
Well, I did it the other way around because when my kids were in primary school, they had to have iPads for school, and there was a
Mm.
couple of apps that they had to have on the iPads. And I think, I can't remember whether or not they had to have Google accounts, but a few of the other accounts, and you had to be 13 to create an account. So I had to
Mm.
lie about how old my kids were. I added 10 years to their age so
The
they could
schools
get these
made me
apps
do
that
it.
they
Yeah.
had. Yeah, so they could
So
get these
Google
apps
now
that,
thinks that your son is 47 or something.
yeah, basically. So Google thinks that my son is middle aged at this point.
Mm.
Um, but so yeah, sometimes you've actually got to do it the other. But that also would have meant that at that point, even though they were 8 or 10 or however old they were, they could have gone, yeah, you think I'm 25, I'll do whatever the hell I want. So they
Mm.
kind of again force you. You are forced to make compromises. You're forced to make difficult choices, and whichever way you go is not necessarily the optimal outcome.
I think the other challenge for consumers, though, is that it's very hard to understand the complexity of what you're agreeing to. I mean, just on Facebook, Facebook could have a clause, and they probably have something that's way more complicated than this, but they could just have a clause that says, we will share your data with the Meta group of companies, which is, of course,
Mm.
the big holding company that owns Facebook and all those other bits and pieces. Now, you might click that thinking, all right, well, that's just Facebook. But of course, it isn't. It's Facebook, it's Instagram, it's Oculus, it's anything else that catches Zuckerberg's fancy and checkbook on a given day across the planet. It could be any of those, and of course, they might then have sub clauses. It could be almost impossible, I think, for a lot of consumers to really kind of track this stuff down. And some of the forensic analysis I've seen of data tracking, just for single-use services. I mean,
Mm.
it's genuinely mind-boggling if you are not already in these spaces. For the average consumer, I sort of get why they throw their hands up in the air. At the
Mm.
same time, I am baffled by anyone who would admit to a major crime on anything
Well,
online for
I,
anyone ever.
whilst I was thoroughly listening to everything you said there, Alex, I was also looking at my screen here at the research report that I was talking about, and there's a question on there that we are talking about, and it's when you're using an online forum like WhatsApp, Gmail, Office 365, Facebook, Slack. Please check all these apply. You have admitted cheating on a partner, and this was 14% of Australians out of over 1,000 people admitted
Which
to
means
have
more than
cheating a partner.
14% of people cheat because they're the only ones who admitted it. So it's
Yeah,
obviously even higher. And that's a
on what
pretty
they
scary
say.
stat.
Knowingly lie about something is 16%, which I think would probably be more, really, wouldn't it? 12% admit to a crime. 16% admitted to using illegal substances, 17% saying something offensive, such as racist, sexist, or anti disability, and 21% saying something about a colleague, friend, or family member that would ruin their relationship. So, yeah, it's quite, you know,
But people do this
I,
on Twitter. Like,
yeah.
we only have to look at Australia's politicians. People say that kind of stuff in open forums anyway. So I
Mm,
really don't think we stop to think at all about the
no.
consequences of what we're saying and when we're saying it, even when we're saying it in relative public like Twitter, let alone saying it on Signal or WhatsApp.
I don't know whether it's the age thing as well. I mean, I know, we're all roughly the same age, sitting on here, shaking our fists at the clouds and talking about how we'd never have done this kind of thing. But I mean, I was just wonder if there's a generation coming through that really do have a degree of just not caring and just thinking, well, it's out there, and what that's going to do, in the future. I don't know.
So, speaking of what's going to happen in the future, Elon looks like he's going to get his claws into Twitter. Why? What's in it for him? Why would he want to spend $1 billion on Twitter?
Because he can, I think, is the answer. I mean, I've been knowing that I've been coming to record this podcast today. I've been keeping an eye on his Twitter feed today, and he's on there more than you know we work in an industry where I always joke where tech venture capitalists spend 80% of their time on Twitter talking about the companies they've invested in.
Hmm.
And he's just tweeted so much just in one day. And I know he's probably trying to prove the engagement, but I think he just really likes using the platform and likes being a celebrity. And is also a bored billionaire and can afford to do it. Um, I'm sure I've read plenty of theories about how he wants to use it to connect up the financial system, um, to integrate it more to the blockchain and global payments network, disrupt banks, become what PayPal could have been but never was. But yeah, I don't really think it's that. It just seems to be he got annoyed by the idea of censorship and cancelling people and people getting offended at things like Trump, and thought, well, I can do something about this because the talk of free speech and the talk of um, making it an open platform. I buy that's what he thinks he's doing, but I just think it's loopy. Um, that we can view the idea of the world's richest man buying up the what they're calling the public square and think that that's anything other than the establishment taking over. He's managed to cultivate this image of a sort of outsider butting against the system, but he's the world's richest man. He is the establishment. And look, he's been tweeting today when we record this about the idea that they should encrypt the direct messages on Twitter, because that's one thing that people have been saying as well. You wouldn't want to be a Tesla employee that's leaked anything to a journalist via a Twitter DM because he can now see them. But he said, well, no, we should make that end to end encrypted. And he's just been having these back and forth with various people about what he's going to. I'm going to buy Coca-Cola now and remove the cocaine from it.
I
Just
thought it was put the cocaine back in.
put the cocaine back in. So yeah, you're
Yeah.
right.
That's a sales
And
pitch.
He pretty clearly
yeah,
likes the sound of his own voice.
Yes, very much
yeah,
And
so.
he's, let's face
Says
it,
3 guys on a podcast.
oh, sure. But he's got this long history of making big, bold statements and claims. I mean, if you
yeah.
look at
Yes.
Tesla, easily his most successful venture, and we've discussed this on the podcast before, we were meant to have automotive driving by now. Adam was meant to be tooling around town on his Cybertruck by now. And we don't have those things for Tesla. SpaceX, I don't think we were meant to be on Mars by now, but I think we were meant to be on the way, and we're not. And this feels to me like it's just more Elon being Elon. He's talking up a big game, but he won't necessarily follow through with it.
Mm,
And he made this big statement as well about opening up the algorithms of Twitter, making them more open. And that sounds wonderful. People sort of like the idea of open source and of things being open and accessible for these closed companies. But Paul, do you think that also opens up the issue of the reason why Google, for example, would never open up its code because people would just abuse the heck out of it to, be at the top of the Twitter feed to get free ads or to just spam everyone in their DMs, whether or not they wanted it or followed them or not?
well, yeah. I mean, that was always the argument when DACCC was saying about opening up the algorithms was you don't know how complex that would be because there's so many interlocking things. It's updated so many times a day, and you wouldn't know what you were looking at anyway. So the average person wouldn't know what they were looking at if they opened up the algorithms. And if we're talking about the negative impact of mass social media platforms that have occurred, it's because people have worked out how to game the system. You think of Cambridge Analytica on
Hmm.
Facebook, um, various, and most of them are related to Facebook, but Twitter doesn't get off scot free in that area. Sort of genocides that have been whipped up by fake reporting and misleading algorithms, and Musk has obviously said that he wants to get rid of the bots, which is no one's going to disagree that that's not a good thing. But it's also not as simple as that. I don't think. And I was just reading something today. I mean, he was having a debate on Twitter, and I should say I really admire Elon Musk. I think he's achieved a huge amount, and he's one of the visionaries of his time. But I don't think he's qualified to talk about public discourse any more than you or I do. You can just afford to do it. You can afford to buy a platform. And I was going to read this to you because it just makes no sense to me. He was replying to a, a tweet from well-known, um, I don't know, freedom thinker Ben Shapiro, who was
Really?
talking about, Twitter should be politically neutral, and then every left wing person losing their mind over it. And Musk replies, attacks are coming thick and fast, primarily from the left, which is no surprise. However, I should be clear that the right will probably be a little unhappy too. And this is the next bit that just makes me think, geez, man, he's still smoking. My goal is to maximize area under the curve of total human happiness, which means the roughly 80% of people in the middle. I mean, that just, to me, that just doesn't make sense. It's like, when you sat at 3 o'clock in the morning at university, talk about, man, if everyone just agreed on this kind of stuff and just was truthful with each other, I mean, man, wouldn't that be a better world? Why do we lie, man? And it's just not a realistic view of what happened. People do game these systems. People go on I mean, and yet you can say left or right. And, I work for a newspaper that outrages the left as much as the right. My leanings on most issues would be closer to the left, but it doesn't mean that I haven't received plenty of vitriol for articles that have been nothing to do with me, telling me have my strings being pulled by various ex-liberal politicians and all that kind of stuff. And people on the left and the right can be vitriolic and horribly rude on there, and there's lynch mobs left and right. But just by saying we're going to allow free speech, we're not going to censor, it's not like no one's thought of that before. It's not like when Jack Dorsey was there, or they didn't think, well, why don't we just stop the bad stuff? I mean,
Why didn't I think of that?
yeah, it's he sounds like a guy selling easy answers, um, probably from a point of view of, I really can afford to invest and fix this, but it's not as easy as he says it is, and it's not as simple as just saying, well, we're going to stop cancelling Dave Chappelle. We're going to stop, I mean, okay, you can agree or disagree with that kind of stuff, but it's really tinkering around the edges, and those aren't the areas that have really caused harm on social media. It's been internal executives saying that outside of America they don't moderate content. There's junior employees left to police content in huge parts of the world, with uprisings being incited, and elections being manipulated, with no one caring, because the New York Times aren't going to do a big expose on something in a country that most people in America don't care about. So it's this idea that we can, adhere to the freedom of speech laws in the US, and then that will be it, man. But Twitter's used in one or two more countries that have different rules around. Sweden, it's a crime to to speak out against LGBTQI rights. It's a crime. In Germany, it's a crime to speak about, to promote Nazi ideology. Things that you can hide behind the freedom of speech in one country, you can't in another. And you can say it's always been like that, but we all know, we all use, if we use Twitter, we know we can see stuff that is abhorrent if we wanted to. It's there. And so I just think the guy's peddling easy answers, and it might not change much, but I don't see, just the idea of bring back Trump, stop cancelling comedians isn't really changing the service for the better. So I guess we wait and see. But to me, it just sounds like a rich guy with a lot of ability to do what he wants, taking control of a platform that lots of people want to use, and want to use for various things that he's not interested in.
I'm trying to figure out what his idea of free speech is. Well, what it looks like compared to what we've got now, because you can pretty much say and do whatever you want on Twitter,
Mm.
and there's a few people like Trump who can't, for good reason. Um, and the things they have been trying, one thing that social media has been trying to make an effort on, as you were saying before, is things like misinformation and impacting the outcome of elections. So, is his idea of free speech to strip all that away and just let everybody say exactly what they want? Or if he wants to keep all of that, then where is the line for free speech? I don't. It's
Yeah,
a sort of it's a conflicting message.
I don't know. It just seems like it's like people when they say they're in favor of freedom. Uh,
Yeah,
freedom
my
to
kind
do
of
what?
freedom, not your kind of
Yeah,
freedom. I'm in favor of my kind of freedom. Yeah.
it doesn't actually
It's
mean
that
anything.
it's that free speech. I think I don't know. I'm not Elon Musk. There's a surprise. I think it's that oft kind of touted idea of free speech without necessarily facing the consequences. I think that's
Mm,
the thing that Musk doesn't particularly like. The idea that people might be told, well, actually, no, that's over a line. That's inappropriate. That's not right or true or fair or reasonable, as per a standard. But he's also applying that very American view of free speech. And I think, Paul, you touched on this earlier, that he sort of seems to care. I think Twitter broadly seems to care about American standards and not much else. I mean, and the thought strikes me, I mean, locally, we've had some cases of even Americans getting sued by business people here in Australia because of Australia's much tighter defamation laws.
mm.
And I think even some precedents that say that, if it's published in Australia, if an Australian can view it on the internet, then it is defamatory in Australia and you could be liable. I'm willing to bet Musk hasn't really thought about that kind of side of things either.
And I mean, obviously from the financial review angle, we also look at the fact that Twitter hasn't been profitable for a long time. I think it's made profit twice. Um, Removing all the bots and removing your yeah, making your active user count drop isn't going to be good financially as well. And I don't know. I mean, there's investment banks going in on the deal with them as well. So the idea that you can just run it into the ground financially doesn't really stack up as well. Um, I don't know. I don't know what the end game is. I mean, maybe he buys it, takes it private, it becomes super popular. He lists it again in a few years and makes a big fortune or more of a fortune. Not that he needs it. I don't know.
So he's
It
going to
just
flip it.
seems,
He's
yeah,
going to do
I
an
don't know.
You
eBay and
could have
flip
paid,
it.
he'll flip it. I have,
Mm,
Paul, I have seen the suggestion today because apparently part of his deal, and it makes sense, is that he's not allowed to disparage Twitter. He's not allowed to
mm.
say negative things about it or its leadership while this deal is going through. And yet, Elon Musk, being Elon Musk, he seems to not be able to help himself. There are
No, he's been
tweets, and I've
doing
seen,
just that. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
I've seen some debate about whether or not the tweets are disparaging or just critical and where the line falls on that. But he seems to be playing around with that line. And I've seen the suggestion that actually he's trying to back out of the deal.
Get himself
That's going to
disqualified. You
cost him a
mean?
fair bit of money, though, isn't it?
Well, maybe that's the thing as well. People are talking as if he's bought it, but he's still got to get shareholder approval, still got to get regulatory approval as well. So it's not a fait accompli, but I think when once the CEO and the board are saying yes, then it's likely to go through. And look, it's not like Twitter hasn't been problematic before. I mean, we're talking like Elon Musk is coming along and paving paradise. He's not. I mean, I was at a conference a few years back now when Martha Lane Fox was speaking, and she's a big name in the UK tech scene. She was the founder of lastminute.com, one of the sort of big names from the .com era over there. And I don't know if she still is, but she was on the board of Twitter at the time, and she was talking about how they have very frank conversations about the fact that women get treated appallingly on there. Um, and 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 her conclusion in this speech was that it was built by a group of sort of well-off to middle class to well-off blokes that had never been wolf whistled when they walked past a building site and just never knew what the real world was like, and so they built it with that in mind, and then suddenly got confronted by the horrible reality of what happens online with misogyny, racism, bullying, and then they didn't really know what to do about it. So they've been trying to play catch up ever since on that, and it's obviously still not been solved. People still get horrendous comments, um, women more so than men, obviously, um, and it's not been solved. And I don't think coming in and saying we're going to loosen the leash a little bit and let people go a bit more free and easy with what they say is going to make it a better place. I don't think they'd solve that other problem to be going back and saying, right, okay, how do we make this less of a policed conversation? Because a lack of moderation has always been a problem on social media, not the need for more free speech in many ways.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Paul for making time for us this week.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Paul, it's time for you to face the Vertical Hold 3 questions of doom. Don't worry, they're not too brutal. 3 questions. I'll ask all of them. You can answer them in any order that you like.
Okay, go ahead.
Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And our current big contentious question, if Hollywood is making a blockbuster movie of your life, who's playing you?
Right, okay. Where can they find me? On the AFR website, behind a paywall, unless we've put it on social media when you get clicks. So afr.com. And ironically, from what we've just been talking about, most often on social media, on Twitter. So Smithy is my handle. So go and find me there. And who's playing me in a movie? Well, I don't know. Well, who do I want to play me in a movie? I would love to buy a time machine and get Jack Lemmon to play me, because I love Jack Lemmon. But I don't think I don't dig up the corpse of Jack Lemmon. But
They can do a lot with
So
otherwise,
you
CGI now.
could weekend at
yeah.
burning it.
But a comparison that flatters me hugely, which I've never seen, but people at work used to call me Doctor Who when David Tennant was on there, because I think it's because I've got a slightly big nose. And the local pharmacy where I lived said, "Do you know you look like the guy that used to be Doctor Who?" So I'm going to take it, even though it flatters me hugely. He can have the job as well.
With my own Who fandom in mind, I can only applaud this idea. Let's get Tennant on board for the Paul Smith story. And as always, while we wait for Vertical Hold, the movie, you can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, as long as Musk doesn't kick us off, at verticalhold.com.au on the web, or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And while I wait for Brad Pitt to return my calls, don't forget to tell your friends about us, leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice, and help us spread the good word in 2022. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. I see you could be more of a Bruce Willis. I reckon Bruce Willis, Brad Pitt, Vertical Hold the movie. No, doesn't work.